Welcome to this week's episode of The Savvy Author. My name is Clara Rose. I am a literary consultant and your host today. If you've not been with us before, let me be the first to welcome you to The Savvy Author Show and invite you to join us every week as we talk about all of the things that you need to know to be a savvy author. And then, of course, if you have been here before, welcome back, my friends. I always like to start out the show by just diving into what those pieces are. What do you need to know to be a savvy author? And it really is about the three phases of book creation. So I like to start there. So what are the three phases? Well, first of all is the brainstorm and blueprint, phase one. This is where we analyze your topic. So we're actually creating the right book for you and for what you're trying to accomplish. Then, of course, we brainstorm, where we capture all of the ideas that are floating around in your head. And then we blueprint them, or outline the structure, if you will. The book industry will call this a book build, and I just call it a blueprint because it's what we're going to follow as we create your book. Then phase two is the create and correct, where we actually write, which is getting your hiney in the seat and getting words on paper. And then, of course, editing, because everyone needs an editor. First of all, we're going to edit ourselves after a cooling period, and we might even do a peer edit, having someone in your writer's group or someone close to you have a look at it. But ultimately, everyone needs to hire a professional for their edit. Formatting, of course, which is getting it ready to publish, also best done by a professional. And then your final or third phase of book creation, which is the publish and promote. So here's where it's understanding all of your publishing options so you publish correctly for you and the work that you're doing. Promoting, which is just getting the word out there, letting everyone know that your book exists and that you exist so that you can sell. And, of course, an ongoing plan for selling your book. It doesn't happen unless you sell your book. And, of course, isn't that the point? Getting our message out to the world, whatever it is that we have to say. Now, today we're doing something a little bit different in that we're going to talk about the other kind of writing. I don't focus on it all that often. Most of my books are in the nonfiction realm. So we do a lot of business books or brand awareness books. You've likely heard me call them that before. They are about building awareness for your brand, your business, your ministry, your cause, or brand. And those are kind of my wheelhouse, kind of my specialty as a business person, but I also do some fiction. And so today we're going to talk about the difference between fiction and nonfiction, because there are some differences. So fiction and nonfiction books do different things, right? They're created for a different purpose, and creating them is also different. Now, you might be thinking, well, how different can it be than what you just went over, the three phases of book creation? Well, part of those are still the same. We're still going to do the creating and the correcting. We're still going to publish and promote, but that first part is definitely different, and that's where I'd like to focus our energies today. Understanding those differences are really important if fiction is your goal. So let's talk a little more deeply about that. Fiction versus nonfiction. Of course, you've heard people say that words have power. I'm here to say books have power. Books have the power to inform, educate, inspire, entertain, and even change the world. So the question is, what kind of book do you want to create? Is it a brand awareness book that's going to bring brand awareness to your business, ministry, or cause? Is it an autobiography, the story of you that for whatever reason you want to share with the world? That might be that you want to make a difference in someone else's life. You might want to inspire them with your story, or you might want to leave a legacy and maybe even just create a book for your family for the future. Maybe an allegory is what you're after. So if you don't know what an allegory is, it is a work of art like a book, but it can be other than a book as well. But it uses a story to make a point, to teach a principle, or you've probably heard of the allegory of the cave. That's a great example of using story to get another point across. It's kind of fiction, but it has a nonfiction point to it. And then, of course, a parable, which Jesus used in the Bible times years ago, and that was to teach his disciples or followers or the crowds about a spiritual principle. So that's a parable. Fantasy, of course, is a type of fiction, and some people love it, some people don't. Romance, some people love it, some people don't. Mystery, which is one of my favorites, or poetry, which is definitely one of my favorites. It doesn't matter what you want to write, it really matters why you want to write it. So let's dive into what the difference between fiction and nonfiction is. We talked about the brainstorm and blueprint, right? Analyzing what your book was going to be about. That's looking at who else in the marketplace is doing that kind of work. How is your book going to be different? What are you going to say that's going to help you stand out? And then brainstorming, getting all of that stuff, that content out of your head so that you can get it into your book in a way that makes sense, and then blueprinting it so you have a roadmap to follow, if you will. I call it your foundation. It's like the starting point for creating your nonfiction book, your allegory, your parable even. You need to know specifically what order they're going to happen in your book. It might be chronological, it might be thematic. Whatever you're going to do, all that is decided in that foundational piece, the brainstorm and blueprint. So let's talk about how a fiction book is actually very different in the brainstorm and blueprint phase of creation. Let's look at the fiction difference. So in the brainstorm and blueprint phase, we're going to start with analysis. So that's really about audience interest, whereas when you're writing the nonfiction, you're doing research to look at what else is out there so that you can compare and see how you're going to stand out. This is really about finding your audience. Of course, story arc is very important, the hero's journey, and we're going to talk a little bit about that as well. And then characters, the development of the roles that each of your characters are going to play in your story, your fiction story. Of course, the create and correct, those things still happen the same. You still have to write, you still have to edit, you still have to format, you still need a professional. And then publish and promote. You still need to understand what your publishing options are. You still need to publish your book. You still need to promote it, get the word out there so people know that it exists. It's a little bit different kind of promotion for sure, but you still need to promote it. And then ongoing sales is ultimately the goal, whether you're writing fiction or nonfiction. So either one, you're still going to want those second and third phases to happen, and they happen much the same. It's just that first one that makes a real difference. And that's why we're going to dive more deeply into that first piece. So a brainstorm and blueprint, if you will, but for fiction. Let's dive in. All right, analysis. So like I said, this is where we want to do an exploration of audience interest. So it's really just about seeing what audience out there would be interested in your topic, whatever it is you want to create your fiction book about. So have a look and see what types of books that you see that are in the same genre that you would like to be in. Now, I mentioned a few of the fiction genres a few minutes ago, but there really are like 50 different genres out there. So have a look at what your book might fall under and see what else is out there in that genre. And then, of course, how many of those types of books made it to a bestseller list somewhere? An Amazon bestseller list or, the New York Times bestseller list. There's actually quite a number of bestseller lists out there that you can be on for different reasons. Most of my authors are shooting for an Amazon bestseller because that's where it's going to start first for them. But if that matters to you, your research phase, your analysis phase is really going to make a difference. If you don't see anyone in your genre that are making bestseller, that's a sign that maybe there isn't enough of an audience for that particular genre. So if that matters to you, if hitting a bestseller list somewhere matters to you, that's something to think about. If that doesn't matter to you, then stick with a genre that makes you happy. And then finally, if you cannot find any books in the genre that you are thinking you're going to write in, be aware. This could mean that there just isn't an audience for the kind of book that you want to write. So I love to use the example, and I've used it in many different ways, but I love to use the example of the sumo ballerina. I saw an awesome graphic once with a sumo wrestler in a tutu and toe shoes, like up in a, whatever that little spin is. I'm not a ballerina, so I don't know what that's called. But this little spin, and it was the sumo ballerina. So that's just a great example of not everything being for everyone. So likely the market for a book about sumo ballerinas would be fairly small. I don't know that there's a lot of them out there. Now, if that's your target audience anyway, that's who you're trying to write for, okay, just know that that particular audience might be a bit small. So if you're thinking bestseller list, probably not going to happen because those are 100% based on volume of sales in any given week when they hit the market or when they're on the market. So just something to think about if that's something you're wanting for your book. All right. Let's move on beyond analysis. So the next part used to be the brainstorm, right, when we're talking nonfiction, but here we're talking story arc. So a story arc follows your hero's journey throughout the story. This is called an arc, but it can be done in a straight line as well. But it is the story of where your character starts out in your story, and then what obstacles that your character meets along the way, because that's part of any story. And then what victories they experience in your story. They have to have obstacles and they have to overcome those obstacles. And then finally, where does your character end up at the end of your book? And the most important question, will the story leave the reader feeling what you intended for them to feel? So have you ever watched a movie or read a book where nothing happened? Of course not, because nobody would watch the movie. Nobody would read the book. If nothing happens in the story, you quickly lose the interest of your watcher or your reader. So for us, of course, it's about our readers. If something doesn't happen and it's boring, you are going to quickly lose them. Now, the story arc is also going to include things like, other than their obstacles, things like little victories, things like interpersonal relationships with other characters in the book. You're going to learn all about who they are as a person. You're going to watch some personal growth in them, or you're going to watch self-destructive behaviors. All of those things are built right into your story arc. The hero that your journey takes from the beginning to the end of your story. And then, like I said, super important, when they're done reading it, do they have the feeling that you intended for them to have? Personally, I don't like a story, whether it's a book or a movie, that ends and leaves me feeling annoyed with them. I'm like, that is not how this story should end. I become annoyed if there isn't a good wrap-up at the end, right? We want to see somebody overcome something, or somebody achieve something, or some transformation happen in our main character, right? We want to see them get that love interest, or get that movie deal, or whatever it is that this story is telling. We want to see there's a resolution. When there isn't a satisfying resolution at the end, people are left feeling unsatisfied. Like, oh, that sucked. That was the worst movie or worst book ever, right? Now, if you want to leave people with that feeling and that was your intent, okay, but how likely are they to recommend your book to somebody else? And how likely are they to ever pick up another book with your name on it? They'll see you as the author and go, oh man, I read such and such and that book sucked. They're not going to give you a second chance. So just make sure that whatever feeling you'd like to leave them with at the very end is indeed the feeling that you left them with. It's all a part of building out a good story arc that takes your reader on a journey. The journey of your hero. We started here, we overcame, this obstacle, we had another obstacle, we overcame it, we fell in love with this person or fell out of love with this person. Here's where we ended up over here. We're satisfied, fulfilled, motivated, whatever it is that we're trying to say with our story. Now, of course, if it is a true story that you're telling and it's not really a work of fiction, like an autobiography where it's a true story, where you end up is where you end up. A few years ago, I ghost wrote a book for a lovely couple in Florida who he was dying. I spoiled it already, for 18 years, dying of multiple diseases. And at the end of the book, he hadn't been healed. He hadn't died, but he was still with us, but he was very, very ill, and we knew that it was just a matter of time, and he was going to leave us, and that was just it. And that's where the book ended, because that was his story. It was a story of beautiful things still happening in the midst of all of that, but at the end, the resolution was just about motivation, just about there is hope. There's still hope that you can have a beautiful life. Well, God miraculously healed him, and his story continues. We're working on another book, and eventually we'll write a better ending for his first book, but he still, even though it was an autobiography, he still had to take you on that journey. So there was a bit of a story arc that needed to happen in that book. So even though it was an autobiography, there still could be a piece or an element of story arc to it. All right, let's move on to what I think is probably the second most important piece to your fiction book, and that is characters. Your character development. It is really crucial for the success of your story. In fiction, it is super important. Every character needs to feel like a real person in the world that you're creating. Now, that's not to say that if you have a fantasy world that they have to be real people. They can be fantasy type people, they have 10 toes or, whatever it is in the world that you're creating, but they need to be believable as a real person within that world. They each have physical characteristics, so you need to create those physical characteristics for that person, each person. You need to create a personality for them. You need to decide how it is that they might react in any given situation. Now, I get a lot of pushback for whatever reason on this particular piece from a lot of authors. They feel like as long as they have a general idea of their character, that's good enough. But I'm here to tell you that what can happen along the way is if you have not clearly defined what your characters look like physically, or how they might behave, or what their personality type is, you might find yourself writing something that's not congruent to your characters. When it becomes unbelievable, the character's actions become unbelievable, you start to lose your readers. They need to be able to buy into each of those characters. So here's a great example. So if you have a character, maybe a young lady who's very shy and very quiet, I would say like meek and mousy kind of, just wouldn't say boo to a soul, but then somewhere along the book, she's screaming in somebody's face or popping them in the beak. People are not going to believe that from her, right? That's just too large of a leap. So here's my best advice in character development. Actually create a written piece about each of your characters. Now, this isn't going to be in your book. Pieces of it will, but this is for you, the writer, to help you stay focused and stay on track. So each person, their name, what they look like, even if you're not going to use a full name in your book, make sure that you give this person a name, what their physical characteristics are. Do they have blonde hair and blue eyes? Do they have green eyes and red hair? Black hair and blue eyes? Physical characteristics, short, tall, round, skinny, three-legged, whatever it is, physical characteristics, personality traits. What are they like as a person? Kind of dive deep into what this character's personality is, and then think about how would this person react in given situations. If somebody threw something at them, got angry with them, screamed at them, somebody stole something from them, figure out how that person, it's a real person in your book, how that person is going to behave. That makes all the difference when you're writing. So if you create one of those for each of your primary characters in your book, and then put them where you can see them when you're writing. I love to put stuff on my wall. I have my computer sitting here, and I have a big wall right here. I love to stick them on the wall so that they're right in front of my face. And in any given moment when I'm writing, I can glance and say, how would this person have reacted to that? Right? We're creating scenes, creating events that a person in our world, a real person in our world, is going to play out. And so we want them to play those things out appropriately. I can't talk. So that's super important. Deciding how they're going to react, because those reactions will play out in the storyline in your book. Whew. Now you can create and correct. So don't start writing your story until your foundation is completely established. Your story arc and the character development is going to be the framework that you build your story on. So much like for the nonfiction work, the brainstorm and blueprint does the work of getting all of that, the topic content ideas out of your head and get an outline for you to follow. That's what this does for your fiction work. It gets all of your characters out of your head and developed, the storyline of what's going to happen from start to finish. I think that's why they call it an arc, start to finish, but it could be a line, start to finish. Have that all mapped out so that you know exactly what your foundation looks like. Before you start trying to tell the story of these people, you need to figure out who they are and what they're going to do. Now, that's not to say that things won't morph a little bit as we work through the book, and I'm going to give you a few tips about that, because that is a very natural process as well. Some fiction tips just for you to consider. Characters should evolve as people during your story. In fact, people do that in real life, so why wouldn't they do that in your book? They do. Plot twists might surprise even you, and that's okay. In the creative process, as you're writing, it may surprise you when your character takes a turn you didn't expect. I have seen authors cry when unexpectedly they killed off one of their characters, and it made them, they actually cried over it. I have had tears over unexpected twists or unexpected things that happened as I edited someone's book. Plot twists add dimension and depth, and they are okay, my friend. Just be sure that any of those twists that do show up, that they fit into your story arc somehow. It can't totally trash your story arc and derail your story. And then be sure that your characters behave in a way that is congruent throughout the story. You can't have them being meek and mousy in one chapter and another chapter being flying off and being in full rage. It just isn't congruent to who they are as a character. And then mostly enjoy the writing process. Fiction writing is creative and fun. Enjoy the journey that happens when you write a book. Whether you're writing fiction or you're writing nonfiction, there's a journey that takes place in the process. And I'm here to say, enjoy it. It can be a wonderful, wonderful experience. And congratulations. Congratulations, because 85% of people say that they want to write a book someday, but only 3% actually start writing their book. And even worse, of that 3%, 97% of those people never finish their book. Just getting started alone makes you stand out in a crowd. So why is it that 3% actually start writing a book, but 97% of those 3%, they never even finish their book? It's because they didn't have a plan. They didn't have a system to follow. They sat down with a tablet or in front of their computer and started telling this story. So somewhere along the way, they get derailed because they didn't have either a brainstorm and blueprint to keep them on track, so they know what to write next, or they didn't have a story arc, so they don't know where the story was even headed to start with, or it's so vague that they wander off track, or their character development was non-existent or so poor that people don't act congruently in the book, and you quickly lose connection to your story arc, quickly lose yourself in the process, and don't know what to write next and set it aside. I've seen it happen when people come to me and say, hey, I've been working on this for 10 years or whatever. It's just because they didn't have a plan. There's a piece missing, and I'm here to tell you that that will make all of the difference in the world. If you are looking for some help getting your book written and you're looking for a writing community, we have a place for you. The Savvy Author Mentoring Program might be for you. If you hop on over to our website, which is at clararose.com, you can learn more about this process and get you started on your book journey. Now you can hop into the Connect tab and grab a spot on our calendar, have a conversation, just a 15-minute conversation about what it is you're trying to create and the different programs that we have available to you as an author. Whether it's a fiction book or it's a nonfiction book, we have a program for you. We also have a great community of writers who would love to partner with you on your journey as you create your book. If you remember correctly, I mentioned in the editing piece that you self-edit first, but you can also peer edit. This is a great thing for writers groups to do, and we have a community that can do that with you. It's just about saying, hey, have a look at this chapter or this character and tell me what you think. Peer reviews are wonderful before you hire your final editor. We have also final editing and publishing services available if you need those, my friend, and we invite you to just stop by and say hello. You can also drop us an email at hello@clararose.com if you have specific questions that you can't find answers to on our website. And if you have questions you'd like to have answered on the show, you may also send them to hello@clararose.com, and I am happy to make a show where I answer it just for you. So thank you for being here once again. I appreciate that you show up every week to learn everything that you need to know to be a savvy author and give me the opportunity to give some of my years of wisdom to you. I get such joy out of it. I will see you again, same time next week, same place. Thank you so much. See you next week.